Hello, and welcome to our podcast,
Sisters, Not Wives.
I'm your host, Kinsley Hatch.
And I'm Jocelyn Hatch.
Today we are going to be talking about the most volatile time in LDS Church history, period. There's murder, there's fires, there's rioting. So I was gonna not do this episode because it's a lot of history and it's not super polygamy centric.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided to do it. It's about the time when the Mormons are in Missouri, just because even though it doesn't have a ton to do with polygamy happening in Missouri, I feel like everything that happened in Missouri shaped a lot of these people's psyches who entered into polygamy and kind of shaped their defensiveness and their willingness to be controlled, and then people who started polygamy, just a lot of their psychological effects came from everything that happened in Missouri because it was pretty traumatic. And it also kind of leads into Joseph Smith's murder and everything that happened leading up to that and why people were acting the way they were acting.
I thought you said white people acting like
White people acting. It all comes from freaking Missouri. No. I thought that was important. So Missouri. So last time we talked about in the overview how they were in Kirtland, Ohio, and then their bank failed and they kind of got ran out of the state. And so they went to Missouri because Joseph Smith had a revelation about how there was going to be a temple there and it was going to be a gathering place for the saints and blah, blah, blah. They were like, let's go to Missouri after getting kicked out of Ohio because there was already Mormons settled there. The thing is, Missourians are not super tolerant back then, at least. They were not super tolerant. And so when the Mormons first settled there, it was kind of definitely a culture shock because Mormons tended to gather all together and group and then go live somewhere to form their own communities, which drastically changed the demographics of wherever, culturally, religiously, all that. And then it was a weird little religion. So people on top of that, they didn't like that. But also a lot of the Mormons were from the north and from New England, that type of area. So most of them were anti-slavery and the Missourians were pro-slavery. So that was a hot topic that didn't rub well with the two groups. And then also the land in Missouri was super cheap. So for an acre of unclaimed land, it was $1.25 to buy.
Can you imagine?
I know, right? That would be crazy. But for them back then, if they could buy it for really cheap. And then if they improved it, farmed it or built a house or some kind of business, whatever, they could pretty quickly raise the value of the acre to $20, almost 20 times the value of it pretty quickly. And so the Mormons were coming there and it was great for them because it was cheap land. But at the same time, the Mormons who were there before and other Missourian settlers were buying all this land because it was opportunity, a really good way to make a ton of money with this land. And so it immediately caused issues because before there had been kind of two headquarters of the church. There was the one in Kirtland where Joseph Smith was and the first presidency was. And then the Missouri settlers for the Mormon side, and it had people like Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, who were two of the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon. All the OG saints were kind of leading the church in Missouri. So when they all came to Missouri, there was issues with all the leaders now because they were leaving Ohio in a panic. They needed all this land, and the church leaders who had stayed in Missouri had bought a lot of land, and it became really messy, whether that was their personal property or if they bought it for the church. And then on top of that, America was going through a financial crisis and the church was definitely going through a financial crisis. So people started accusing each other of stealing money from the church and counterfeiting and money laundering.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We just had all the money problems going on.
So lawsuits started happening inside the church itself. Also, at the same time, tensions are building on the outside as the Missourians and Mormons are not getting along. Originally, what had kind of compromised the Mormons back then to have their own peace in Missouri is okay, they were fighting, and back in the early 1830s when they first settled, they were getting mobbed and there was a lot of anti-Mormon sentiment. but that kind of calmed down because they were like, okay, the compromise is the Mormons will all live in Caldwell County in their own county, and then that'll be fine. But with everyone moving there now, they were spreading out into other counties, and so the Missourians were getting ticked and very aggressive. And then on top of that, there is a lot of issues inside the church with the leaders fighting each other. All this escalated into what was known as the Mormon War of 1838.
The what?
Yeah.
I have not heard about this.
I know, right? It's called the Mormon War of 1838, which is basically the violence that happened in Missouri between the Mormons and the Missourians.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's the crazy thing. Like, we all have heard about these little things, but like
connecting
it, yeah, it's like we never quite do that. So
yeah.
But what happened was, before this, obviously, like, Joseph Smith had been tarred and feathered, Sidney Rigdon had been tarred and feathered, there had been lots of attacks and things like that. But
I think it just tripped me out because it's called the Mormon War, so it sounds like either the Mormons were fighting each other or the Mormons were the one being the instigators.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure who named that, but it wasn't just the mobbing that happened. There was fighting on both sides. So what happened was kind of the language and the rhetoric used by the leaders of the church, like Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, started to get a little bit more like defensive. And for a long time, they were like, turn the other cheek and let's try to go through the government when we get attacked to try to fix things. But basically, every time they tried to appeal the government for when their families or like people in the church did get attacked, the government was like, sorry, you know. Eventually, Missouri, it's getting pretty hostile, and they just had this horrible experience in Kirtland. So they start being a little bit more aggressive and being like, we don't want to fight, but if we do fight, we're going to fight to the last drop of blood. And so they're getting like a lot more like
quickly.
But I know.
Swing to the other side.
They were getting a lot more aggressive, but also just because it felt like they were getting attacked on both sides. There was an infamous sermon by Sidney Rigdon, who was a part of the First Presidency, in June of 1838 called the Salt Sermon. And it was more addressed to the fighting inside the church with the church leaders who were kind of dissenting and having lawsuits against each other and the church. And he basically said, like, dissenters were like salt that lost its savor and they should be like trodden under the feet of men. And so people took that as like, oh, dang, so we can like kick out apostates and things like that. Later that month, a letter got sent to the leaders of Missouri who were having the conflict. So like David Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, like William W. Phelps, like all those people, they got this letter that was signed by 83 men, like Mormon men, that basically said, like, we know you've been counterfeiting. We know you stole from the church. We know you're evil. How dare you say, like, if we attack you, you're going to get a mob up against us. We're going to force you to leave no matter what. And you better get out of Caldwell County or else we're going to make you. So they get this letter that's signed by like 83 men with some really interesting characters. One of them being Samson Avard, which was the leader of the Danites. Have you heard of the Danites before?
Right, that sounds so familiar.
Yeah, it's kind of, there's a lot of like myths and folklore around it, or like the destroying angels. They go by different names, but it's basically this vigilante group that was like a secret society that vowed to do right or wrong, whatever, to protect the church and protect the leaders of the church. And it started with what was happening in Missouri. Samson Avard was the guy who started it. And it was like this secret society where they would go and they would mob non-Mormons and they would like burn their houses and kill people and basically just do what was doing to them, but flipping it. And it was all
they
secret.
were part of the church?
Yeah.
Oh, what?
Yes. So it was like a Mormon vigilante group.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this is where it all started. And there's a lot more later on about like if Brigham Young or not used them as kind of like a secret police or something like that later in Utah.
Interesting.
And there's speculations about that. But this is where it started. And so they started doing that back to the Missourians, but not yet. So after the sermon, those people like who had been threatened by that letter fled and settled in different counties that were not Mormon counties. But the non-Mormons heard about that and were like, oh my gosh, the Mormons are being crazy. And then on August 6th in Gallatin, Missouri, there was voting, like for county elections and state elections. And it was kind of a big deal because the population was growing so much. There was like 30 Mormon men who went in to go vote. But then there was like 200 Missourians who were there who were like, the Mormons will not vote. So they started like arguing about it. And the Mormons were like, you can't stop us from voting. And they're like, we 100% can. And then like a drunk person attacked one of the Mormons. And then a whole brawl came out where there was like clubbings and beatings. And luckily there was no guns and no one got killed. But it was crazy. So like violence finally erupted from all this. And then the Mormons left. They escaped without voting. And then Joseph Smith heard about that. And he was like, are you kidding? So he got a group of men, which a lot of them were members of the Danites who would form later. And they all got in this group and they went to go see what had happened. And they found out, like, luckily no one had been killed, but that the Mormons had been attacked and couldn't vote. And then there was rumors that the justice of the peace of that county, which was Daviess County, Judge Adam Black, was plotting with the mobs to go attack the Mormons. And so Joseph Smith is like, no! And so he gets this big group of men and they all go to Judge Adam Black's house and they're like, we need you to sign this document that says you're not going to attach yourself to any mobs that are going to attack Mormons, that you're going to be fair and you're not going to do stuff to us. And the judge is like, I'm not signing anything. But he's like,
well, don't sign their stuff either.
Yeah. Well, that's what he eventually said. He's like, I'm not going to sign what you wrote up, but I'll write something up and sign it saying that I'm not attached to any mob. I won't molest anyone if no one molests me. And so he writes that. I know, funny word, right?
So funny that they used that
I
so
know,
much
it's
back
like,
then.
It's all over.
It's in the hymns, too.
That's true.
None will molest me. That was a terrible rendition. But you know the one.
Yep. Yeah. It is crazy how language changes over time and how suddenly that is not what it means anymore.
Right. That is awkward.
Yeah, you're like... Just Smith is like, I like women. So he signs the document and they leave, and then he files a lawsuit against Joseph Smith being like, my life was threatened and I was bullied into signing that. And Joseph Smith like threatened
his own paper? Or the one that they brought to him?
Yeah. He felt like he had to because they were bullying him and like intimidating him by all surrounding his house. Later on, he submits a lawsuit, but basically that kind of opened up the gates for violence to start. And so for the next 2 months, from like August to October, the Mormons are just getting brutally attacked. So much mobbing, so much like burning of property and assaults, like physical assaults. Women are getting sexually assaulted. Families are having to flee from their homes. There's this one story of the Lathrop family where one of the mobs actually captures a family, and the mom was really sick at the time and they had 3 kids. And so they capture the mom and the kids and they take them and they hold them for a week. And the dad goes and he gets his own little posse of Mormons. They come and they eventually rescue them. But one of the kids died while they were...
God.
Yeah. So one of the kids died while they were in captivity. And then, like
how did they kill him?
I think it was from exposure because the mom was already sick. And I think they were just, you know, like not being taken care of. And then after they rescued him, the mom died and the 2 other kids died too. So the whole family, besides the dad, died from that.
And after he went and rescued them.
After one of the kids died before, and then the rest of them died after. So things like that were happening. It was like an early onset winter there. So even though it was in October, it was getting really cold, and there was just like...
imagine.
Yeah, and people were like, had no homes and were fleeing for their lives. So it was like really brutal. And it was really sad because there was non-Mormons who were like trying to stop it. And like militia leaders who were getting involved and trying to petition the state government to do something about this. And then we're trying to lead the militias to like stop the violence between the 2 groups. But a lot of times the militiamen were full of people who, like Missourians, who agreed and didn't like the Mormons, and so the militia would go there to stop it, and then the militia would get out of control and join the mob. And it was crazy because the Governor Boggs of Missouri at that time, he got petitioned by these non-Mormon militiamen, and he was just like, yeah, let the mob and Mormons fight it out. I'm not going to get involved. And so they felt like they had no recourse. And then that's when the Danites got involved, and the Danites and other like Mormon vigilante groups were like, enough's enough. In October on 18th, they planned 3 attacks on non-Mormon settlements. It was like on Gallatin, Millport, and Grindstone.
Sorry, who planned these attacks?
The Danites and the Mormon vigilante groups. So they planned these attacks, and word of it got out that it was going to happen. So 2 of the settlements, Millport and Gallatin, the people had already evacuated by the time the Mormons got there. So they just started burning everything down and taking all the property. And that was another thing with the Danites. They felt like if they stole property and plundered, as long as they consecrated it to the Lord, it was okay. So just a lot of like theological, like crazy stuff, justification and all that to do some horrible things, essentially. And they felt like the ends justified the means, and they were right in everything they did as long as it was for the church. So they did that. And then Grindstone Fork and Millport became a ghost town after that. No one returned. And then Grindstone Fork, the people hadn't evacuated yet. The Danites and the vigilante groups did the same thing. They were so upset about. They like kicked families out. There was like pregnant women and children who were fleeing for their lives in the wintertime. They were destroying homes, and it was just like super brutal.
I feel like I've seen many movie video clips of these scenes.
Right. Especially, well, mostly from the Mormon side, though, that happening to the Mormons.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting because the whole church history, there's so many like stories and like videos and things like that of that time, but it's really vague, you know, like we've all seen those scenes. And like, do you remember Hans Mill, the Hans Mill massacre? Did you ever hear about that? That was a part of this.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember exactly the details, but
yeah, that's the thing. We don't really have, it's so interesting for a church that's so much about family history, how like there's a lot of historical stories, but not really a like, hardly any Mormons have like know the history of when happens when. And a part of that I feel like is because it's so whitewashed and it's so boring, you know. It's like, how can you keep the facts straight when it's so boring, you know? But yeah, that's like, it happened before this, but Missouri was when it was really, the mobbing was really happening full scale. But this obviously was the Mormons doing it to non-Mormons.
Do they ever talk about that?
No. Well, and that's the thing. The church like hates when people talk about the Danites, because it's rumored that the Danites lived on from this period and were like in Utah with Brigham Young and were like doing his bidding. But the thing is, it's a secret group, so it's not super provable. But the church says that the Danites like stopped after this period. And a lot of people say it went on. Yeah. So yeah, so the Danites did all these attacks, and then the Missourians reacted and was like, okay, we need to need to disarm the Mormons so they can't do this anymore. So they go in and start taking guns away from Mormons and like kicking them out of their houses and be like, you need to flee to some other county. You can't be here anymore. So they're doing that. And in the meantime, they capture 3 Mormon men and like take them as their captives. And then rumors start to fly that, oh my gosh, they kidnapped 3 men and they're going to kill them. They're going to execute them. And so one of the guys who helped in the attacks that the Mormons did, that the Danites did, his name was David Patton. He gets a whole group together to go rescue those 3 men. And so you have 2 groups together, the Missouri militia, and then this group led by David Patton, who are Mormons. They go and they meet and they exchange gunfire, and there's like 2 lines, and it's an actual battle. And it's the Battle of Crooked River is what it becomes known as. Only 4 people die, so not a crazy battle, but enough that it was like, oh my gosh, 2 forces are fighting each other. And it was rumored that one of the men that the Danites got a hold of before killing him, they had like broadswords and they like mutilated his body and cut up his face, and that was kind of crazy. That's kind of a thing that's, and blood atonement that comes later, all of that is kind of associated with Danites and like mutilation of bodies, like that kind of starts here. Like under the banner of heaven, they talk about blood atonement and they talk about, well, and polygamy is a big thing. It's kind of interesting how all these little things tie together, especially with fundamentalists nowadays.
Yeah.
This is where it all started. There's just tons of rumors going on right now because everyone's scared. So after that battle happens, there's tons of rumors about how like the Mormons killed half of the militia and how all these kind of things about what the Mormons did. And it gets really exaggerated. But it gets back to Governor Boggs. And he's like, that's it. The Mormons need to leave. They're revolting. And so he does Executive Order 44, which becomes known as the Extermination Order, which basically says the Mormons have 30 days to leave Missouri. And if they don't leave, it's basically like full on the purge. You can,
free for all.
Yeah, you can steal their property. You can kill them. You can do whatever you want to them. They are no longer welcome in Missouri. There's like a mass exodus of Mormons being like, oh my gosh, we need to leave. And then Joseph Smith is like, oh my gosh, this has gone way out of hand. So he starts like begging for peace and trying to end it. And then he eventually gets arrested for that lawsuit with the judge and tried for like his part. Like, did he have a part to play in any of this? So there's a lawsuit with him and a couple other people. But the Hans Mill massacre happens 3 days after the order, the executive order. So a bunch of people are fleeing and they're in this community, and rumors start to fly that the Mormons are planning on burning down Liberty and Richmond, which are non-Mormon settlements. And so a group of like 250 Missourians go to like be like, let's kick those people out. And they go to this settlement, which is by Hans Mill. They're like, we're disarming all the Mormons. You need to leave, blah, blah, blah. There was like 40 to 50 Mormon families there. And they like give them their weapons and they try to be like, we're not trying to do anything. We're not going to fight. We're just like joining together so we can leave. But the Missourians have like had it. And so one guy, Thomas McBride, he like surrenders his rifle. And then one of the Missourians shoots him with his own rifle. And then the guy's like reaches out his hand and he cuts off his hand with a corn knife and then starts
What knife?
Yeah, a corn knife. I think it's like a corn knife. Yeah, so it's crazy. Like literally like shoots him and then he's like, and then cuts off his hand and then he mutilates his body and starts just like hacking it. And so all the women and children like flee to the woods and the fields, and then like a group of men run into the blacksmith shop to try to like have a fort where they can defend, and they keep their weapons and they go there. But the blacksmith shop was made out of logs and it just had a bunch of holes in it. So it basically became a death trap where they were stuck in there, and the Missourians could really easily like stick their guns in there and kill everyone. And that's what they did. So like all those men are getting killed inside the blacksmith shop and they can't get out. And there's like 10-year-old boys in that shop and they're just getting massacred. Like it's just like gunshots everywhere. And then the Missourians are attacking the women and children. There's like assault going on. So it's just like mayhem.
So sad.
Yeah, it's just like so brutal, so sad. And at the end of it, 17 people are killed, all Mormons. I would say like the extermination order, then Hans Mill and all the mobbings just like imprints itself in the Mormon collective experience. They just remember that for forever.
Can you imagine how traumatic that would be?
Yes.
And it's just like trauma after trauma after trauma.
Right. It's like just keeps building, and they keep trying, even when they are trying to be peaceful, it's just like brutal, like women and children and boys and like defenseless men. And it's just like, it feels like an onslaught. And then on top of that, when they tried to go to the government so many times to like help them, the fact that it's coming from the state government, not only were they being dismissed by the government before this, but now the government is like their active enemy and being like, no, we're going to kill you if you don't leave. And no Missourian. So like Joseph Smith and a bunch of other people were tried for their part in like, were they responsible for any of these mobbings that the Mormons did or anything like that, but no one was held responsible for what the Missourians did, and no one was ever even tried for the Hans Mill massacre.
Yeah.
And so it was just like really sad on both sides. And that's after this, they all fled to Nauvoo, and that's where the Nauvoo era starts. And the people of Illinois were like really sympathetic to the Mormons at first because everyone knew what was happening in Missouri, and it was like so brutal and so sad. But it's just kind of sad because the whole thing, like, you have the people on both sides who are making bad decisions, who are heating up and like doing these awful things to each other. But it just like made me think of all the people in the middle, you know?
Yeah.
Like the leaders who were non-Mormons who were trying to stop it and they couldn't. And then even there's a lot of Mormons who were kind of like sickened by what their own people were doing and their need for revenge. And then the people in the middle who were like not making the policies, not conducting the leadership, but like the women and the children on both sides and the families and the men who were just like getting their homes destroyed and getting attacked and getting assaulted. And they literally, like, I feel like that's how it always goes in conflicts like that. You have the people at top who are fighting, but the people who suffer the most from it are the people in the middle who are like the women and the children and the families and the men who aren't engaged who get the brunt of it. And it was just like,
Yeah, that's true. That's sad too. I just keep thinking, I'm like, wow, fear is crazy.
yeah.
That's literally what it does on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're afraid of them doing whatever they're gonna do. It's the power of fear.
Yes, 100%. It's just like,
And you just see that repeatedly over and over and over
Yeah.
again throughout history.
it's like ingrained in humans, like the us versus them mentality, and how easily it can spike fear and how easily it can create normal people to do like atrocious things to each other and justify it, you know? It's so interesting because now we have like social media and like we get our news in different ways. We still see this in social media though, but like the fact that rumors had so much to play in how escalated things got, and the fact that these rumors were people scared and just like, oh, they
And
got
just
killed.
fueling the fire.
Yeah. And even now, I feel like social media honestly makes it worse because back then they didn't know what was true because they were all kind of disconnected, and so they would just hear things and run with it. But I feel like even in social media, we still do that because we don't know on the internet what's true and what's not. And so we just like, if it plays into our fear, sometimes it feels true and then you perpetuate it. And it's kind of crazy how things back then, like, it's literally the same. Humans are the same. It's just different circumstances. So kind of nuts, but
It is nuts.
yeah. Yeah, so that's like, I know a lot of talking and a lot of history, but I wanted to go over that just because I feel like that really was defining for the church and where they led.
Absolutely.
And kind of Brigham Young. And also the Danites is a really interesting thing of how it came to be. But next episode, we'll actually get into Nauvoo, which is where polygamy like really started to spread. And there was a lot more in-depth things and a lot more proof once things start in Nauvoo. So we'll talk about that, but I wanted to at least like broach this subject so you could kind of have like an understanding.
Yeah, I think the full picture is important.
Yes. So
Cool.
that's it.